This charming story, told to their innocent young children, says that the descendants of their God who descended into this world. The sacred scriptures say that they are demigods sent to fight against evil. They protect this world from fallen humans who have made a deal with evil and are trying to steal human emotions and wreak havoc. But even in the midst of the chaos, a legend lurks. The little girl was very much upset and hurt, and cried so bitterly that this crying was heard by her mother. When the mother entered the room, she saw her daughter Emma, very upset and crying. Claire approached her daughter and asked what was wrong and why Emma was crying so bitterly. Claire replied to Mommy that Emma was silly. Mom asked in surprise, "Why did she say that?" Claire looked at her mother without averting her eyes, for she knew that Emma was trying to write another letter to the May Fairy to ask for another present. Mom looked at her daughter Claire and realized she was right. "Is this wrong?" Claire went on to tell her mom that the May Fairy wasn't real. She was the one who gave them all those presents. The girl told her sister this, but Emma called her a liar. Claire even showed her the letters in her mom's drawer, but she was still upset. At that moment her daughter Emma ran up to Mommy screaming. The mommy girl hugged her and started crying. Emma was very upset because she still believed in miracles. She looked at her mother and asked, "Is it true that the May Fairy does not exist?" The mother stood in bewilderment and looked at her two daughters. She thought, "How can this be? Her twins can be as different as day and night." Patting her little girl on the head, she asked her not to cry or fight with her sister. But Emma was so upset that she tried her mom to find out if it was true or not. And just in this situation alone, Claire watched it all and thought that fine, she needed to defer to her sister again. Then Mom pulled herself together and said, "Emma, I'm sorry, Mommy's not the May Fairy." Even though it was hard for the girl to say it, she had to lie. But what to do? Emma grabbed her sister's hand and said, "Claire." She too understood that there was no need to fight and resent each other. After all, they are sisters. Emma smiled and expressed her desire to apologize as well, holding Claire's hand. The girl suggested they make up. Claire loved her sister very much and never got mad at her. Besides, she liked Emma's smile very much. The girl always smiled genuinely. Emma, like a naive little child who only had games in her head, could only suggest at this point that Claire play outside if her mom would let her. Mom was more than happy to let the girls go, only to have them be friendly and not fight. That grabbed Claire's hand, and the girls ran out of the house. Their mom only had time to yell to them to make sure the girls didn't stay out too late. Emma was more than happy to shout about not promising they wouldn't go too far. Mom reflected on the fact that right now her girls were just innocent children, but sooner or later they would grow up and become adults. The girls ran up to the hillside where there was a small clearing with flowers. Emma immediately rushed to pick daisies. Plucking a few flowers from the stems, she said, "That'll do," showing her sister Claire this bouquet she had picked. She said she wanted to make a flower wreath for Mommy. The little girl was glowing with happiness. She loved it all so much. Claire looked at her and expressed that she wanted a wreath made for her too. Emma was overjoyed. She would love to make her a wreath like her mom's too. At this moment, Claire was looking at her with very sad eyes, because unfortunately she wasn't interested in all of this. The girl stood at the edge of the forest amidst all this beauty of flowers and trees, and realized that she was very bored, and at this moment she could do something else, not just pick flowers and weave a wreath. At her young age, Claire was preoccupied with such thoughts as why all the children believed in the May Fairy. She walked to the edge of the forest where there was a beautiful view of their little town. How can they believe that the good fairy really exists? Do they turn a blind eye to the truth for the sake of some free gifts? At that moment, Claire knew the May Fairy didn't exist when she first heard about her. Unlike her twin sister Emma, or even any other child she knew, Claire always stood out. Most children would be sad to not have a father, but few would suspect the move. Claire remembered their mother waking them up one night and saying, "Kids, wake up." Claire's first thought, not that they were moving again. Maybe it just means their family is running from something. Mom always said that kids, when you grow up, you'll understand. But that's the small stuff. Claire's biggest question was this. It was rare for a child to be able to do something like this, such as she was able to summon the mysterious power of magic with a wave of her hands. Directing this stream of magic at her sister Emma, it was just a light breeze that blew her gorgeous yellow curls and tickled her by the neck. Emma cried out, "That tickles, Claire!" and laughed. Emma was rapturously immersed in watching the magical manifestations that were happening thanks to her sister. They were standing at the edge of the forest, surrounded by flowers, and at that moment, a stream of magic gathered all those beautiful flowers and lifted them into the air. Emma was like spellbound, watching the flowers take off, rising up in the background of this magnificent spectacle. Claire was also watching, and was amazed at her powers of magic, how she had managed to create this, but it was wonderful to see the petals swirling around her. Emma, raising her hands in delight, shouted that Claire could gather all those petals for her. It was no trouble at all for Claire. The girl used her hands, for the power was in them. With a wave of her hands, she was able to make a kind of vortex of flowers and petals. They all swirled around her and in a circle above her head. Claire easily gathered all these flowers and created a huge wreath for Emma. Emma was delighted and exclaimed, "Claire, she's a real magician!" The flowers swirled around Emma and the petals slowly fell, creating a magical and incredibly cute sight, and Emma was very happy. Emma was very happy and thanked her sister for picking so many flowers for her. Claire, it wasn't a big deal. The girl lay down on the grass to enjoy the beauty falling from the sky. Claire reflected that she wanted to enjoy some peace and quiet while she could. After all, they would probably be moving again soon. She kept asking herself the same question. Why was she so different? She wished someone would tell her. She's sick of hiding in villages. She's tired of it. It's weird and boring to her. If they moved to the city at least, Emma might meet someone who looked like her. The girl waved her finger and summoned a magical force that began to spin clockwise in the air, forming a mysterious vortex. This vortex absorbed everything that fell into it and made it spin around, creating a marvelous and mysterious wonder. If there was someone who could explain to her why she was such an unusual girl. As Claire suddenly heard extraneous sounds that weren't there, her startled gaze immediately turned to her sister. At that moment, Emma wove a wreath and shouted to Claire, "Look!" putting it on her head. When Claire got up, she saw her sister joyous with a wreath on her head, and behind her stood the extraneous men who were not in the flower meadow. Claire cried out fearfully, "Emma!" The girl was very worried about her sister because she stood closest to them. Emma turned around and fell slightly to the grass, and saw strangers standing behind her. She asked in surprise, "Who were they?" The voice of one of the men sounded. He said, "Mr. Claire." Claire was very surprised. She trembled, as if she sensed something, saw a young man heading in her direction. As he approached her, he crouched down on one knee. Well, Claire wasn't scared, she thought to herself. She was about to direct all her power at him to protect herself and her sister. But she realized that somehow her strength was gone. The wind died in her hands. She looked desperately at her hands and didn't know what to do. The man asked, so she knew how to use her power. Claire looked at him with a puzzled look. She realized he knew something. Taking a better look, she thought to herself, "This man, they look alike. His violet-colored eyes striking yet aloof at the same time, and his pale skin looks like untouched snow." He also said she looked like him. When the girl heard that, she thought it was Duke Celsius, the hero of history. She watched him from every angle. They really did look a lot alike. The only difference was that she was a little girl and he was a grown man. And of course their physiques are different, even though they look the same. Just as suddenly, Claire thought, oh, she doesn't have time to think. Turning her head, she saw Emma sitting on the grass. She ran up to her sister and grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. Emma stood up from the grass and the girls began to walk toward the house. Claire shouted at the men to stay back and started waving her arms. Emma clung to her sister like a little puppy. Then the man asked, "Are you twins?" when he saw the second girl. He himself was very surprised that there were two of them. He didn't know or didn't expect. He asked, "Are their names Claire and Emma?" And Claire said, "Yes, why does he ask?" Then the guy smiled because he knew or realized something. Emma, who looked out periodically from behind her sister, saw that the man smiled, and she laughed back at him too. She exclaimed that her name was Emma. "And what's your name, mister?" Claire yanked her sister away and told her to be quiet. The man said his name was Arshil Constantine de Sandos. The girls thought, "Wow, what a complicated name, Arshil." "It is an ancient tradition of their empire," Arshil continued. "A father gives his name to a daughter who looks nothing like him, and the daughter who looks like him is named after her mother. Therefore the name Emma is one of the varieties of the name Arshil." Claire stood up and asked, "What brought him here?" Just as suddenly her mom's voice rang out. "Claire? Emma?" Mom was running down Flower Street and yelling, "Girls, where are they?" Her voice was already worried because she saw men standing around them. Emma saw her mommy and screamed with joy that it was her mommy. When Mom reached the girls, she said, "It's time for supper. Let's go," putting her head down. The woman was very nervous. She was wringing her apron with her hands. "I don't know what else to say." A man's voice said, "Charlotte." The woman slowly raised her head and saw him. At that moment the wind blew in, blowing Charlotte's dress and Arshil's cloak to the wind. They stood staring at each other, unsure of what to say. The man interrupted this silence and said that they had finally met after all these years. The girl's mom, whose name is Charlotte, replied that she didn't think she would see him again. The man said he did not know she had given birth to their daughters. Charlotte objected at once, because the girls would be better off with her, and without him. Claire was standing next to her mom at that moment, and she thought so too. The girl realized that her mother didn't like living with him, but she didn't know yet for what reason. So she stood and listened attentively to their conversation, to understand a little. Charlotte turned away from the Duke and the girls and said, "Why is he here? She doesn't want to see him." The man wanted to change everything, but Charlotte didn't understand why he'd come all this way to stop her. Well, the Duke was surprised. What was wrong with a husband looking for his wife? At this point, too, Claire wondered how they had ever managed to have children in the first place. She didn't even know they were still husband and wife, so she suggested he divorce her. The Duke panicked. How could they divorce when they had just been reunited and were already talking about divorce? He expressed his opinion because it was out of the question, because she had escaped execution. She remembers that. Hearing those words made Claire think a little. Execution? What could Mom have done that would get her sentenced to death? They'd been fighting since the moment they met, and now he was showing concern. Emma stood there shaking with fear. She was more fearful than Claire after hearing those words. Charlotte felt her daughter shaking and was very frightened. She hugged her and explained that it was nothing to be afraid of. At that moment, the Duke saw Charlotte hugging her daughters and became a little sad himself. He had lost it all. Noticing this, looking at him, she realized that for some reason his face was like that, as if he was regretting something, but she didn't know what. She could only guess. Whether he regretted that his pregnant wife had to run away, or that they'd started fighting when they met, or that he hadn't found them sooner. She doesn't know the details, but she can guess that he has a lot to regret. Charlotte, hugging her daughter Emma, said that if the only way to keep her alive was to be a duchess, then he should go back and tell everyone she was dead. He could perfectly well say that a spoiled princess like her couldn't survive outside the castle, and he wouldn't care. Everyone would believe him, and she will continue to take care of their children, and he will remain in the shadows for the rest of her days. I mean, he lived perfectly well without knowing he had children. He can continue to do so. Claire stood looking at the Duke and thought about the fact that, from what her mother had said, he was still famous. Even she had heard the story about him. The story goes as follows. Arshil Constantine de Sandos, or Duke of Celsius, a close friend of the present emperor and Asteriol of the court. After he married the daughter of a former emperor, he played a key role in overthrowing his father-in-law from the throne. Then it turns out her mom is the daughter of a former emperor, She'd heard stories like that, and they left a lot to be desired. How could he do that to her? His own sister screamed. Her mother's father, a former emperor, was a cruel tyrant. He murdered his sister, the rightful heir to the imperial throne. His reign was full of blood and tears. After helping to overthrow the tyrant emperor, Duke Celsius set things right and returned a worthy ruler to the throne. Then it turns out if Mommy is the daughter of a former emperor, will they be executed if they find out they are alive? Duke walked over to his wife Charlotte and tried to put his arm around her, telling her that she really thought she was fine without him. He said they both understood and knew perfectly well that he had barely survived since she left him. Duke remarked that it was getting late and the girls must be tired. He offered his help to see them off for a while. But Charlotte saw the carriage a little way ahead and said, "Arshil, they—" and stopped talking because she was worried that now she would have to go with him and what would happen to her girls. Emma saw the carriage and said, "Wow, it's so beautiful," and started whispering in her mom's ear that they were going to ride in that carriage. Mom sighed very sadly and realized that they probably had no choice. Out of all three of them, Claire was the happiest. She realized it was punishment for saying her life was too boring, but she was still glad things were moving too fast. Emma climbed down from her mom's arms and took Claire's hand. She said, "Come on, Claire, let's take a ride in this beautiful carriage." The girl was very happy and excited, but only Claire's unchildish reasoning again, thinking that she at least knew or had an idea of where it would take them. Emma was the most careless and easygoing of the family. She grabbed Claire's hand and said, "Let's go," pulled her towards that carriage, and only her mom stood there wondering who her daughter had taken after. But it certainly wasn't her from worry. Charlotte began to rub her temples. At that moment the Duke came up to her without saying anything and took her hand very gently. The moment was noticed by Claire, who was standing nearby. Claire knew her mom had a habit of rubbing her temples when she was stressed or not feeling well. Every time she saw her put her finger to her ear, Claire realized that they were probably going to move soon, or so it seemed to her. The man takes her hand as if he knows all her habits. And for a minute Claire understands why her mother decided to marry him. The girls approached the carriage, and one of the knights opened the carriage door saying, "Come in, please." Emma stood in front of this carriage, and looking at it, it was just perfect for her. The girl looked inside the carriage and couldn't hide her delight. "Wow! How superb and beautiful it is in there!" she exclaimed. Inside the carriage, all the seats were upholstered with gorgeous material, cheerful curtains of red velvet that added to the beauty. Emma looked to see that there was a step before she entered the carriage, but it was too high for her. The girl couldn't reach it. Then the Duke came up and said, "Lady, let me help you," giving her his hand. The girls didn't immediately realize to whom he was addressing. "Lady?" It wasn't like he was calling someone specifically by name. They looked at each other. Then the Duke, without thinking long, took Emma by the armpits, lifted her up, and put her straight into the carriage on the seat. Emma was so excited, so many emotions of joy, because she had never had such a thing in her life. The girl thanked the Duke for putting her in the carriage. Claire was left standing in front of the carriage, waiting. But Claire realized she could get in herself. Maybe tell him that. But before she could say anything, the Duke took Claire under his armpits as well, and put her in the carriage next to Emma as well. Emma shouted, "Claire, look, the seats! They're so soft!" and began to feel them with her hands and rub her butt on them. Putting Claire in the seat, he adjusted her dress and noticed that she was a little dirty. There was a stain on her clothes. He's being considerate, the girl thought. He then warned the girls that he would be right back for their mom, showing them with his hand to sit down and not go anywhere. As he showed them with his hand not to go anywhere, Claire noticed he had a ring on his finger that looked like a wedding band. She wondered how come he was engaged to her mother. So much time he had spent searching for his runaway wife. What was he thinking when he saw the engagement ring on his finger? She couldn't understand any of it. So many thoughts in her head. So many questions. Duke walked up to Charlotte and gave her his arm as well to escort her to the carriage. He was likely the last person on earth who could have a good relationship with her mom. And yet Charlotte got into the carriage. Claire was very concerned about that question. If Mama had seen that ring he still had on his finger, he still wore it after all. Charlotte sat on the seat of the carriage, a little indignant, folded her arms crossed, and asked him where he was taking them. The Duke replied that he had found an interesting place nearby, so they would go there. The Duke was about to close the door of the carriage when suddenly he heard a child's voice. "Wait!" He turned around and saw Emma's small hand holding out a flower to him with the words, "Here, this is for you." The Duke was surprised by this act. He didn't understand why she was giving him this flower. Emma explained with a smile on her face that it was a thank you for giving them a ride in his carriage. It's also the wild rose, her most favorite flower. It only blooms in May and signifies longing for family. The Duke held the flower up to his nose and smelled it. It smelled very sweet and delicious. He liked this act of the girl. He honestly did not even expect it. Charlotte then stood up and picked up Emma, asking her to take her seat and finish her pleasantries. She then asked for the door to be closed, and the Duke replied, "Yes, your ladyship." Duke stepped aside from the carriage to smell once more this flower his daughter had given him. Claire watched this through the window and thought he didn't seem like a bad person. Why did her mom think they'd be better off not messing with him? On the other hand, though, this information is handy. Emma jumped up and motioned toward Claire, sharing with her that she would love to ride all day in that carriage. But would she like to? And Charlotte, the girl's mom, again asked her to sit still. She doesn't want her to fall off. Emma replied, "Yes, Mommy, I'm sorry." Claire noticed again that it looked like her mother had ridden in this carriage more than once. Charlotte noticed that her daughter, Claire, had become quiet. She asked her, "Is something troubling her?" But the girl said she was fine. Well, Claire was very worried about her daughter. She inquired, "Is there anything she wants to ask her?" But Claire replied that she didn't need anything. "Don't mind her, it's fine," and the girl turned away out the window to keep out of sight. Charlotte was very worried and sad, folding her hands in her lap. She said, "Okay, but if you need anything suddenly, don't hesitate to talk to her." Charlotte sat down by the window and watched their ride. The girl thought that if she didn't ask anything now, it didn't mean that she didn't have any questions. In this situation, on the contrary, there are so many questions she would like to ask. But she is not sure her mom will tell the truth. The seat might be comfortable, as Emma shrieked, but Claire was still worried no matter what. The carriage drove farther and farther away. Their journey lasted into the evening, and everyone was already dozing off in the carriage. Suddenly the carriage stopped, and the horses stopped clattering their hooves on the sidewalk. Claire opened her eyes and saw that they had stopped somewhere. The carriage door opened, and the Duke said they had arrived. Your Highness Charlotte asked to help Claire first, as the girl was already awake and able to stand on her feet. Duke took the girl under her armpits and asked if she could stand on her feet so he could carry her out of the carriage and place her on the ground. Claire thought that he had no experience with children yet. He was a little uncautious. Then the Duke helped Charlotte out, and from the carriage she took Emma in her arms, for the girl was quite asleep and not awake. When Claire struggled to wipe her eyes with her hands to wake up, she found a majestic castle in front of her, and on either side of the long alley leading to the castle stood a multitude of people, men and women, dressed in uniform. When all got out of the carriage, they proceeded toward the castle down this long avenue, and all the servants, men and women, bowed to them. Claire stopped for a second and looked at her mom. She now realized that her mom had once been a part of this world. It was the first time the girl saw her mom for who she really was. While Claire was admiring and pondering, she didn't notice her being picked up by a Duke walking by, taking her in his arms. She was surprised at his action and simply did not expect it. The Duke asked Your Highness if she liked the place, and of course Charlotte said, "No, she likes the place very much. Who in their right mind would not like it?" Walking up the steps to the castle, Charlotte said, "The only trouble in this place is him." But the Duke pretended he hadn't heard and began to talk about how it was an old estate. But he was very glad she liked it, Your Highness. The Duke, who lowered his eyes, sighed, for he was a little offended at her words, for she said it on purpose, though she herself knows that he hates to be addressed like that. As they approached the entrance, two maids opened the large, huge doors to get inside the castle. Charlotte objected to the Duke. "What can be enough of all this? She is sure she was stripped of her title long ago." The Duke went into the castle and explained that this was not true. She was still the granddaughter of Risula III, daughter of the former emperor and a member of the royal family. She had never been stripped of her title and would never be stripped of it. Charlotte expressed her desire to talk after they put the girls to bed, but the Duke could not stand it and said that he asked to remove his name from the list of founders. In return, she was forgiven and not deprived of her title. After these words, Charlotte was very surprised at such an act of the Duke. The woman stopped, turned around and turned to him and said, "Did he do that? Is he out of his mind? She didn't ask him to do that." The Duke replied that no one had asked him to do so. It was his personal decision. Suddenly the Duke raised his voice and objected that how dare she speak to him like that. Charlotte was a little surprised at this tone, but then, in a calm voice, asked Claire to pick up her sister and carry her to her room, with the words that she would be up to them soon. Well, Claire had already made up her mind. She knew she couldn't go on like this. The girl turned to her mother and asked her to promise that she would not say something she would later regret, and then she could go and sleep in peace. But then she thought she should probably tell the truth after all. Claire began to explain to her mother why she was so excited, because all this time she had thought there was something wrong with her. She wondered why she was so different from the other children, even Emma, her twin. Claire decides to show her mom her secret in a long time. The girl waves her hand to summon her power and just lets it go. That light breeze flies around the girl and the Duke and carries on through the great hall, blowing around every corner. The curtains rose upward under the soft touch of this invisible whirlwind, as if they themselves were marveling at this incredible sight. And then, when the breeze came back to the girl and stayed in her fist, she closed it inside her palm with a sense of wonder. She had never told her mother about it. The girl sadly continued to tell, because she had been a strange child from the beginning. She didn't want her mother to suffer more because of her. After all, her mom had always been confident. Sometimes she could even be selfish. But she worried about them. And for some reason, Claire was absolutely certain that she had become a burden. When Emma was born and had just started talking, Claire was already able to hold a conversation. And as Claire grew older, she stopped feeling like a child, let alone a normal person. Because of these reasons, she was sure that she had broken her mom's heart. The difficulties her mom faced as a single mother were nothing compared to raising an unfeeling child. Even the nanny was talking about how something was wrong with Claire. The child was acting strange, as if she had no feelings. She advised the mom about the temple. It turns out there is help for children like Claire. It might be better if she was sent there. But my mother did not accept these words. She was very angry and swore at the people who said such things, because only she knew the truth. At times like this, Claire would always come to her and ask if she was crying because of her, or because the nanny had said bad words towards her. Claire and her sister Emma were as different as night and day, but Emma somehow always shared her secrets and feelings with her, and Claire didn't understand it. But years and time passed, and their love gradually changed her. Through them she learned to empathize and feel emotions. So the girl doesn't want her mom to be sad anymore. She has shed enough tears because of her. So Claire really likes it when her mom worries about them, but she doesn't want her to say things she'll regret later. Claire turned to her mommy, saying she wanted to ask her something. What had she been thinking about all this time? Then Charlotte realized that there was no more hiding anything. She asked to be allowed to put Emma to bed so she could talk to her Claire about it. Asterial, the destiny of heaven, let the law and justice be established by their God. It is realized on earth as well as in heaven. The sacred scripture says that the Astriols are demigods sent to save mankind, descendants of their God who descended to this earth. Each Astriol is born with unique abilities. They represent holy divine powers and love for humanity. Claire reflected on the fact that while the current Astriols were a little different from the description given in the scriptures, in the big hall, a fancy table was set with various cakes and pastries. and there was tea before the table. When Charlotte returned, everyone sat down at the table to talk and drink tea. Claire saw so many delicious things she'd never seen before and immediately thought of her sister Emma. She asked if they could make one for Emma when she woke up. Claire glared at the Duke and remembered the writing she'd read before and heard the stories. He is a demigod. Though no, he doesn't look like one. His smile is very human. The servant bowed and wished everyone a pleasant appetite. Mom looked at Claire and asked, "Didn't she want to eat anything?" Because the girl hadn't touched her food. Claire replied that not now. She wanted to have breakfast with Emma tomorrow. And Mom asked her, why? Tomorrow intervened in the conversation and explained that he had promised Claire that he would make the same dishes for Emma tomorrow. Charlotte took a cup of tea, took a few sips, then set it down and told Claire she had something to tell her. She saw her daughter and that she was okay. Yeah, she and Emma are different, but there's nothing wrong with that. She was just born different, that's all. And Emma, she's just a normal kid. Claire looked closely at her mom and saw in her a reflection of her sister Emma. She really looked like her mom. The girl hadn't seen her mom's face like that in a long time. So she decided to ask directly, "What's the big deal?" and said she was an Astrial. It's just like Emma looks like her mom and she, Claire, looks like her dad, Astrial. Her abilities are different from divine power. At this moment, the mother remained silent, but the Duke saw that something needed to be said to the child. So he said that he wasn't arguing. It was hard for her not to show her emotions. He snapped his finger. From his click, everything on the table disappeared and there was nothing. No cakes, no teapot, no cups. The Duke snapped his fingers a second time. But most importantly, she has incredible powers. He demonstrated that he too had the same power as his daughter, Claire. From his click for the second time, all the cakes, pastries, and cookies went back in, along with the teapot and cup. And Claire thought it was getting a little surreal. It made Claire wonder if the brownie was real or not. She broke off a piece and put it in her mouth, thinking it tasted the same. While Claire was eating the brownie, the Duke continued to tell her that she needed to stay away from the Emperor and the royal palace. She has no right to use her powers in public. She can only use them within the laws established by humanity. Charlotte resented the fact that she knew the Duke wouldn't make a good father. Was that really the only thing he would want to teach his daughter? True Astrials, which they have not read about in the Holy Scriptures, must adhere to the laws established by mankind. They get titles and accumulate wealth over several generations. So what are the laws? Claire put the teaspoon on the table and asked, "Is that all she needs to know?" But the Duke went on about how the Astrials are different from what is written in the Holy Scriptures. However, there is something that is absolutely necessary to know. At the Duke's words, Claire looked at her mom and saw a disgruntled look in her eyes. The girl thought, are there really hardships that Astrials have to go through? She has no idea, but from the look on her mom's face, she knows. The Duke decided to ask Charlotte about it. She suspected her daughter was also an Astrial, didn't she? Why hadn't she told her about Tara? Then Charlotte became even sadder, and she didn't want to say anything at all, as Claire suddenly asked, "Who's Tara?" And Mom said, "That's the Tara that the scriptures talked about. The devil who seduced the Astrials and brought them to ruin. They are the first of their kind, and entrusted the Astrials. Astrial is the name of their first demigod, and Tara is a mixture of the blood of the Astrials. The scriptures say that Tara was created by a demon. When Tara successfully seduced Astrial, an arrow lost all but one of his powers and was imprisoned in an immortal body. Since then, Astrial has never set foot in heaven again." Claire listened to all this and asked, "So what does her mommy think about it?" But Charlotte sat there, nervous and blushing. Claire looked at her mom and couldn't understand anything. Why her mom wasn't herself and was acting so strange. The Duke realized that Charlotte would again say nothing, and decided to address her himself. He said, "Why not tell her that herself, about her being Tara?" After hearing the words, Claire said, "Wow," but she didn't think what happened afterward. Her mom blushed and was very upset. Claire saw that and thought she didn't mean to tease her. She didn't think her mom was ready to tell her about it. Claire looked at the Duke and saw that he was smiling and even, you could say, laughing. And then it hit her. So this is what Tara is doing with Astriol. Astriols rarely connect with others, and even more rarely empathize with them. But the Tars have awakened their emotions, shaking them to the core, to the point where Astriol now feels love for the daughter he just met. This is what Tara does to Astriol. If this is what love does to Astriol, then Tara for Astriol is a catastrophe, a terrible storm that devastates a flawless creation. Claire immediately became nervous and thinking, was it even possible? Would this even happen to her? And the girl became nervous. The Duke went on to say that scripture does not favor Tara. After all, Tara is a simple man that they, the Astriols, end up falling in love with. Mom noticed that Claire was very nervous. She turned to her and put her hands on hers to calm her daughter down a little. Whereupon Claire said that's how she got Tara too, and how she could meet him. Everyone fell silent. The Duke said then that she might or might not find her Tara, though they're like fish in the sea. Astriol could not know exactly where his Tara was, but as soon as he meets her, he knows it's her, realizes her whole world is standing in front of her. After these words, the Duke and Charlotte's eyes met. Looking at each other and without saying anything, they turned away. Only Claire noticed that she was looking at him like she wanted to punch him. After saying all that, Mom pointed out that it didn't matter all that much whether she found her Taru or not. She is a smart girl and can take care of herself. Her mom explained to her that she could and did just fine on her own without any containers. Claire thought about the fact that her mom was pregnant when she ran away from the Duke of Celtis, so she would try to meet her Tara and be head over heels in love. But what about him? She'd be crazy about a stranger she'd never known. But what if he wants nothing to do with her? Will she be able to survive the departure of her Tara? Claire came back from her musings to reality, looking at the Duke, wondering how he could be so careless about all of this. But the Duke sat back and smiled. He realized that being near them and enduring their hatred was much easier than living without them. Of course, the same person ends up in the fog. He becomes possessive. Claire thought, it's really the same person in the fog. He seems to be completely possessed. She realized with horror that in the future could she become like him? This talk made Charlotte jump up from her chair and said he was crazy. How can he say such things to a child? He should watch his language. But the Duke objected in return too, and asked to be allowed to remind her that she too had better do what she herself said. Charlotte took her daughter's hands and said, "No, Claire. Forget everything he said to her. Her Tara will love her back for sure. After all, she is beautiful and intelligent." Then in his right mind he began to resist her. While Charlotte was trying to explain to her child that she was going to be fine in the future, the Duke at this time was amazed that such people actually existed. Now Claire understood why her mother had run away. Charlotte went to the girl, took her in her arms and hugged her tightly, for she was her daughter, and yet she was still very young. Charlotte motioned to the Duke to apologize to Claire immediately. Claire didn't resent him. She understood why he was so confused. It was all the effect of the Tara. The Duke rose from his chair, bowing. He apologized for being wrong. After a long conversation, Charlotte took her daughter, and they went to their room to rest already. The Duke by the door wished them good night. Turning, he followed to his room. At that moment Charlotte took a couple of steps and stopped, but still she ventured to speak, saying, "Arshile, wait." Charlotte followed him. Running up to him, she grabbed him by the collar, giving him the impression that she was going to strangle him. At that moment Claire was frightened, thinking, "Mommy, what is she doing?" And Charlotte, after all these years, having gathered courage and strength, told the Duke what she would tell him once, so that he should listen to her carefully. She does not hate him. The Duke at this moment thought, what? He was very surprised by these words, but he listened to her carefully and asked her to continue. Charlotte went on to say that at the time she thought she hated him. To be honest, she didn't like him, and neither did the other people around her. And she hated the church too. But most of all, she hated it when he came to see her, even though they argued every time they met. After running away, she had a chance to think things over while she raised her children. What she hated, it wasn't him. and the version of him that was fussing around trying to save her life. The Duke said he didn't understand her now. Claire tensed up too. She could hear everything, and she was afraid her mom would do something stupid. Charlotte went on further about how no one believed that she was Tara, but not him. Thanks to her, thanks to a simple woman who fights every inch of her way, he almighty Astriel was asking for alms on his knees. She hated the world that pointed the finger at him, but even she couldn't admit she was a tear. That's why she was acting like this. But if he hasn't given up on her even after their fights, when maybe she should still accept that she is indeed his Tara. She is sorry that she didn't apologize immediately, but now she knows that she is his Tara Arshil. She is sorry that she denied it for so long. She was afraid he'd leave her, so she left first. She's sorry. She leaned the Duke closer to her to whisper in his ear what she had promised herself she would say if they met again. She didn't hate him. In fact, she loved him. After saying that, Charlotte smoothed his collar, fixed everything, and just walked away, taking Claire's hand. Claire took notice of her at once. It was the first time she'd seen her as calm as she'd ever been. But turning her head toward the Duke, what she saw in him was not restlessness, but stunned. He froze and did not move, like a believer who had received a prophecy from God, and it wasn't clear that his mom had told him something good or bad. His gaze was conventionally glassy. The next morning, Emma was the first to wake up, sitting up on the bed and rubbing her eyes to open them properly. The girl said, "Ah," and yawned. Afterward, she began to feel the bed. She felt how the bed was so soft, for Emma loved little things. Afterwards, she started groping herself and realized she was wearing a new shirt, and it was very smooth too. The girl began to examine the whole room, for it was huge, with a large bed, a table and a chair, a great deal of furniture, windows, curtains. One could list ad infinitum. Emma woke Claire from her rapture. The girl, barely able to open her eyes in her sleep, asked in surprise, "What's wrong? What is it?" Emma started gibbering without stopping. "What? Is the man they met yesterday really an angel in disguise? Did they die and go to heaven?" Claire couldn't understand anything. She sat down on the bed too and started rubbing her eyes. Emma looked at her and said he sure looked like her. Claire here, she was thinking that the May Fairy had sent their father away early. And then Claire remembered. Oh yeah, Emma asked the May Fairy for a daddy. And now she realizes why she thinks he's their daddy. They look just like him, and now she really thinks the May Fairy sent him. Emma saw Claire's hesitation, and she assumed that she thought Daddy was an angel too, but Claire contradicted her. What? Emma started throwing around different assumptions. Maybe he'd lost his memory when he became an angel. But yesterday he remembered them. He'd also taken them to heaven with him. Claire realized her theory was tedious, but it lacked logic. Afterward, the girl asked Emma to keep it down a bit because their mom was still asleep and needed a good night's rest. As suddenly the maids came into the room and greeted the girls, wishing them good morning, and said Lady Claire and Lady Emma. They are here to help them get ready. Claire was getting desperate. She thought, great, now how can she convince Emma that this isn't heaven? When the girls were packed up, they went out into the garden for a walk, and Claire was very concerned about Emma thinking it was heaven. She decided to ask her, Emma, she doesn't seriously think it's paradise, does she? But Emma, gagging with pleasure, of course meant it. There's a lot to like about this place. Claire decided to get justice, and proceeded to explain to Emma that she knows they have to die to go to heaven. She thinks they are dead, but she claims they are alive because they are still breathing. After Claire's words, Emma looked at her stomach and saw that it was moving. She exclaimed, "She's right! She is breathing." Accordingly, Claire mouthed aloud to her that they were breathing because they were both still alive. Claire got a little nervous because her sister always has to explain several times. And because of this, she repeated that if they are alive, they can't be in heaven. Does Emma understand that? Emma, of course, was not easy, for she did not think as Claire did. The girl looked at the manor, then turned her head and looked at the maids. Turning to Claire, she nodded her head that she understood. So it wasn't heaven. Claire calmed down. The girl was a little nervous and thought that she had something. It remained to convince her that Duke Celsius was not an angel. Well, no sooner had Claire relaxed than someone grabbed her arm and dragged her somewhere. As they ran, Claire saw the Duke standing not far away. She thought they were heading toward him. It wasn't long at all before Emma called out, "Hey, mister! Address the Duke!" As the girl came closer, Emma said, "Good morning," addressing everyone. Claire thought, phew, she's glad at least she didn't call him an angel. Just mister. Though, suddenly Claire saw a young guy with glasses near the Duke. She thought, who is that? The boy bowed and said, "Good morning, Lady Claire and Lady Emma. Allow him to introduce himself. He is Duke Celsius's personal assistant, Baronet Louis Rezin, at their service. He has served the Duke since he was a boy." Claire thought the guy was good. Noticed that Emma was shy. He's smart, not to mention handsome. He must be popular with the ladies. Emma approached the Duke, tugging on his sleeve. She addressed him, "Mister." "He's the Duke?" Claire tensed a little at hearing her sister address the Duke, thanks to the introduction of his aide. Emma realized their daddy was no angel. Emma looked at the Duke as if to realize something. She wanted to hear that he was her daddy, of course, but they weren't telling her now. The Duke bent down on one knee and corrected Emma's bow in her hair. Then at Claire's he corrected her sleeve, which had rolled up. As he was adjusting Claire's sleeve, Emma looked at him and glanced at her sister. She started whispering in her ear about how she looked like a duke. Her hair is really shiny. He also has the same hair color as she did before her mom dyed it. Claire sighed and explained to her that Mommy was making a magic potion for her hair. Her eye color was special, and combined with her silver hair, she was attracting too much attention. The Duke smiled and said that Charlotte was really good at magic potions. If she created potions while you were traveling, you wouldn't have to worry about money. Emma was nervous for a very long time and couldn't find her place. But she decided to go to the Duke. She went up to him and asked his lordship if she could ask him something else. She wanted to last night, but she fell asleep. The Duke smiled at her and told her what it was about then. Emma continued, "Your lordship, Claire and she are twins. They celebrated their 9th birthday in February." She was very nervous and twiddled her fingers in different directions because she was shy or afraid to ask. "So she wanted to ask," the girl continued. Smiling at him, she blurted out the words so quickly, "He's their daddy?" The Duke only nodded his head as the girl shouted, "Hurrah!" and rushed into his arms. A hug. Because she had really been waiting for this for so long, she had even made a wish from the fairies. The Duke turned his head and looked at Claire. He called her over to them for a hug too. The Duke said, "Go to them," and stretched out his arm to hug her too. The girl had never shown much feeling, and it was very hard for her. She didn't really understand them, but the Duke understood her. He hugged them tighter so they could feel his love and warmth. At that moment, Claire felt his warmth, and she felt so strange. Still, her thoughts kept her wondering what people would think of their group hug. Claire kept looking for some explanation. Why they looked so natural together. A little later, when already awake and the girl's mom, they set the table for breakfast. The girls had a children's table with sweets on the veranda, and the adults were in the big hall. There was a glass door between them. Behind the glass door in the room, Charlotte and Arshil were drinking tea. When Charlotte put down her cup, she said it was his turn, but the Duke pretended he didn't understand and wanted to check with her to see what she meant. But Charlotte only wanted to hear those cherished words. "That's it, he understands perfectly." And only Claire, sitting behind the glass door, could hear them. Emma couldn't hear it, because she wasn't like Claire. But the girl decided to pretend she couldn't hear them. Charlotte went on to talk about how he said she was pardoned in exchange for his removal from the founders list. "Well, what does that mean?" The Duke replied, "That's what it means. There's a list of founders who could the current emperor regain the throne." Even though Claire said that she would pretend not to hear them, she heard everything perfectly. After her father's words, she thought it was a coup d'etat. When people do everything they can to remove a tyrant and install a new leader. Yeah, yesterday had absolutely nothing to do with her, but now she realizes she had something to do with it too. When the tyrant was overthrown by her mother's cousin and ascended to the throne, and her life changed forever. The former emperor murdered his sister, the rightful heir to the throne, and he tried to kill her son, the last prince. The prince was already on the brink of death and barely survived with the help of his subjects. In the end, he regained his throne. Charlotte suspects that the Duke is revealing something from her. She asked him to explain it to her, so she was pardoned. And not only is she a duchess, but she's also the current emperor's cousin. It doesn't make sense. She's just sure he's hiding something. Just as suddenly, the Duke says he woke up the Fermata and swore to her that she was his Tara. At this news, Charlotte almost dropped her cup. She interrogated the Fermata. Then she grabbed her face and repeated, "He means what, that Fermata?" The Duke asked her, and she said she knew some other one. She told him he was crazy. How could he even wake that thing up? Claire had heard the whole conversation the whole time, and she agrees with her mom too. The governor is a phoenix that devours truthful oaths made to humans. Fermata used the oath as energy to create their new heart, and when it is reborn, it serves the person who made the vow. The one who made the vow gains control over the powerful forces of Fermouth, but if he fails to keep his promise, the fiery wrath will take his life and burn everything connected to him to the ground. She remembered that once upon a time there was a king who did not keep his vow to Fermata, and Fermata burned not only him but the whole kingdom. The church was forced to put Fermat to sleep, and promised not to reveal it to the public again, and Fermat's story was forgotten. The Duke didn't think twice. He just wanted the world to know that she was indeed his Tara. Charlotte is concerned that he's saying it so nonchalantly, acting like he's lost his mind. The Duke decided to make sure, because Fermata is only dangerous if he lies to her. He knows his oath is true, so he has nothing to fear. Charlotte looks at him and realizes that he has completely lost control of himself. He knows why everyone denied she was his Tara. Because her dad and her, they put a spell on him. She's been studying magic her whole life, but she still doesn't know what the spell was. The Duke interrupted her, saying he would get right to the point. The spell they were casting wouldn't make Astriel fall in love with someone who wasn't his Tara. At one point, Emma asked Claire if she was going to eat her dessert that was on her plate. Claire switched from eavesdropping on her parents to Emma. She asked her wanting to eat some of it. Emma laughed and said, "No, it's very full, but it looks so appetizing." She suggested that Claire eat it, or at least taste it, and tell Emma what it tasted like. Claire tried to listen to what Emma was saying, and what her mother was saying. And now, Charlotte thought then, what kind of magic was in the spell? The Duke tried to calm her down. He even went over to Charlotte and put his arm around her. At this point, Claire was able to taste her dessert. She said it was delicious. It tasted like lemon cream cake. It's citrusy and sweet. Emma said it sounds tempting and delicious. Charlotte took the Duke's hand off her shoulder and still tried to figure out, then, what the magic was. The Duke began to tell him that it was magic that made Astriel serve the Emperor for his entire life. Claire could see that Emma was starting to get bored, and she was getting uncomfortable. Then she offered her a taste of her dessert, reaching out with a spoon to Emma's mouth. The girl ate a bite. Charlotte said that he had said that this magic only worked in the palace. The Duke explained to her that some leaders are afraid of their subjects, especially if they are more powerful than he is. Emma took a bite of the brownie and said it was really good, but she thought Claire would like it better. Claire wondered. Emma laughed and said to Claire, "She likes graters and sweet desserts, doesn't she?" Charlotte continued to figure out what was going on with this spell. It's not like he's supposed to obey her father, but the Duke explained that this is so because before her father cast the spell, he swore to serve Evan as his emperor. Charlotte was upset and tears were flowing. She was worried and asked for clarification because her father was dead. That meant the spell was no longer working. The Duke asked, wondering if she had cast the spell on him along with him. Maybe she still had those magical powers. Besides, his emperor Evan is still alive, so he will be until the day he dies. But he's happy though, Charlotte. The girl assumed he had power over the Fermata forces, but he was still an imperial dog. Then the Duke said a little indignantly that yes, if it wasn't for her spell, and if she hadn't put it on him with magic, Avon would never have forgiven her. Claire thought maybe that's why the Emperor forgave Mom. After all, Mom is the chain that binds Dad to the Emperor. It turns out her parents met because of a spell gone wrong. Mom's the villain who cast the spell, and Dad's the victim. As Claire reasoned, she devoured the entire dessert. It tasted luscious and bittersweet with the sharp contrast of the lemon tart. Charlotte said that she really loved him. In return, she heard the same from the Duke. He loves her too. But she had one question. Why does his love make her so unhappy? Charlotte began to ponder. When she says she loves him, it means she puts him above everything else. They won't necessarily meet again. She wants him to be free and his life to flourish. She doesn't want to get in his way anymore. Is that so much to ask? The Duke was surprised at these words of hers. Since when did she think that way about others? Charlotte didn't understand why he doubted her, but just the Duke remembered. She had tried to kill herself when they were first married. She told him she accidentally lost her magic and couldn't get it back. Okay, that's not all. When he told her for the 5th time that she was his Tara, Charlotte said she'd hang herself if he said it again. The Duke has also noticed that during their 3 years of marriage there has never been a day without a quarrel. And when he says he loves her, it means he loves everything about her, including her selfishness and sadness. The Duke turned to her, saying that Charlotte, if she truly loved him, she should do the same, just as he loves her arrogance and other faults. Claire understands from her dad's words that he wants them back because he loves her mom, and her mom wants to keep him because she loves him. She doesn't want them to go back to that hellhole. Claire is upset. She doesn't understand how they can love each other and yet refuse, agree, or defer to the other. When Charlotte and Arshile came to a standstill, she asked the children where they were, and the Duke said they had gone to reconnoiter. He thinks they are in the garden. Opening the glass doors that overlooked the summer balcony, the Duke walked in and saw the girls playing downstairs by the fountain, laughing with carefree laughter. They seemed to be having a good time. Charlotte was pleased to hear him say that. When the Duke turned and looked at her, the girl announced that they were leaving tomorrow. And where was she going? He wondered. Charlotte replied that she was going home with the kids. She would find a place where he could never find her. She doesn't want to go back to the palace, let alone become royalty again. She's grateful to him for what he's done, but he can put his name back on the list. She's sure that Evan will make exceptions for him. The Duke was surprised by these words. He realized that it was the best thing she could do for him. Charlotte also realized that maybe it wasn't what he wanted. Yeah, well, it's the best thing she could do for him. The Duke was worried about the kids. After all, they grew up not knowing who their father was. Worse, their mother is a sinner. She may be able to protect them, but she can't help but hurt them. Plus, he swore to Fermata to convince the world that she was his Tara. It's ridiculous that the only person who believes that is her. They had lost a lot and had lived apart for too long. Did she not agree with him? Charlotte walked over to the bookcase and leaned against it because she didn't feel well. But the Duke didn't believe her for a moment about feeling bad in such an arrogant manner. He knows she is not sorry, but Charlotte was surprised at the word arrogant. The Duke let her know that she thought she cared for him, but he would rather take advantage of her pity. At least she was with him. Charlotte realized he was calling it pity. How can he say that? He knows how sorry she is and how much she has suffered. The Duke took a step forward, stepping closer to Charlotte, saying that she was. If she was truly sorry, she would never have done that. The girl was amazed. She doesn't know how she lived with him all this time. The Duke suggested she be honest with herself at least. After all, she just wants to get away from the worst sin of all. She should be honest and stop using the girls as an excuse. After all, she wants to escape because it's convenient for her. She blames herself for falling in love with him, and she can't bear the thought of meeting her father's spirit. The girl sighed and realized that he thinks he knows everything. He knows, or rather, he thinks he knows her better than she knows herself. But it would still be better for her and the girls to return to the capital with him. Charlotte explained that they were the family of a former tyrant, and they would be watched closely. The Duke would like to add the children to the family tree when they ride back. Charlotte isn't sure if she should ask this, but when he asked the Emperor to forgive her, did that include restoring her royal title? As he had said earlier, there was no reason to strip her of her royal title if she became a commoner. Their non-children would lose the right to inherit his title and assets. He would surely do everything in his power to protect her and his daughters. He could swear to the Fermata if she wanted him to. The girl shudders with fear at the word fermate. She never wants him to say that again. The Duke obviously wanted to hug her, asking her to come closer to him. But Charlotte wasn't ready yet. She asked for some time to think it over, and the Duke has given her as much time as she wants. He won't rush her. Then Charlotte made the decision that, okay, she's in. Maybe at least the kids will get to know him better. But if he wants them to be a family, he needs to be more careful. If she hears him talking crap to the girls again, he'll definitely never see them again. Arshil asked to tell him about them, at least something, because he knows nothing at all. What they like, who's into what, who likes what, and how to have conversations with them. Since Claire could hear at a great distance what they were talking about, she thought of her father, that his words were cold, but at the same time full of passion. You could feel the pain in his voice. He hides it, but his intention is crystal clear. She wanted to interrupt their conversation on the pretext of something, but they seem to have calmed down. So there's no need for that. Let them keep talking. As Emma suddenly asked where Mommy and Daddy were, she got worried that they were gone for so long, and Claire pointed her finger at the balcony and said they were up there talking. Emma asked if she could hear what they were talking about, at which point it was just Charlotte talking about Emma being like the other kids. She loves pretty clothes, tasty snacks, books, stories, and the like. It's not hard to make her happy. Well, when it came to Claire, Charlotte explained that with Claire on the one hand, everything is understandable. She loves books, but it's not the books that she likes. It's the knowledge that accumulates after reading them. The Duke was interested in what Charlotte answered him about knowing about everything. She wants to know everything she doesn't already know. When they drive down the street, she looks at the wildflowers. But on the other hand, Claire is always focused. At that moment, Claire heard everything. Everything her mom had told her about her, she thought, well, it kept it from her. But it didn't turn out well. Claire ran up to Emma and asked again what the parents were talking about, and Claire said they were talking about how much they loved their daughters. Emma wondered if that was all they had been talking about all this time. But Claire replied that no, they had just said it. Emma smiled sincerely then, stepping closer to Claire. She said she loved her very much too. Claire sighed and replied, "Thank you." But Emma admonished her. "No, Claire, you need to reply that she loves Emma too." But for some reason Claire couldn't say it. She got goosebumps. Emma then explained that if she kept making excuses like that, she would never be able to say how she really felt. But it's okay, she can say it herself. After all, she already likes her, and she's glad they're twins. Emma took Claire's hand and told her that they would definitely be fine. Only Claire had to promise that if she fell in love with someone, she would be sure to tell them. After all, he won't know her as well as Emma does, and Claire promised that she would be sure to tell everything. Suddenly Emma saw her parents and shouted, "Mommy, Daddy!" and ran to meet them. Charlotte asked, "So did they have fun?" Emma started to tell her that yes, they did. You know what Claire did. While Emma was telling her parents something, Claire stood back and realized the family and Dad. She thought the Duke would be a great father to Emma. I really wanted him to be a good father to her too. Claire got the feeling that her father had spent a lifetime trying to be a good father. It's clothes, toys, coloring books, sparkly accessories. During their stay at the estate, they were given something new every day. Claire realized that he was rich, but nevertheless the situation was beginning to get out of hand. The girls' room was filled to the brim. He's already converted the biggest room into a playroom for the girls, and they're only 9 years old. What's he going to give them next? And what's even more amazing, he spent not only his wealth, but also his time. He played with them all day long. Of course, he wanted to give Mom time to think. Claire thought the Duke had a lot on his mind. Surely he must have better things to do than watch Emma draw. All week, Duke had been showing them that he was ready to take on the role of father. But she wasn't the type to welcome with open arms a father she'd never known. Unlike Emma, who accepted him right away. How can she call him Daddy? Claire can't bring herself to call him Daddy. Nevertheless, The Duke had been patient with her, not showing his worries before she'd gotten up the nerve to call him Daddy. He didn't even talk to her about it, letting her proceed at her own pace. It wasn't until some time later that Claire realized she'd imagined it. He was genuinely happy to spend time with her and Emma. It was strange to her. You could see the love for her in his gaze, just as you could see it in Mommy and Emma's gaze. She had only seen such a tender look in her mother's and Emma's eyes. Surely it was love. Never thought she'd see love shining through violet eyes like hers. He made time for her and Emmy. When he saw her reading a book, he took care of her and brought her more. And when Emma hinted at a new doll, he would buy her one the next day. He would do anything for the two of them. He had only recently found out about them, but he would make up for lost time and give them anything they just wanted. He conveyed these thoughts to them through his actions, and his efforts were noticed by his mom. One day she came into the room and suggested he have tea in the garden. It took Mommy a week to make up her mind. When they all went out into the garden together, Emma asked permission if she could play with Claire over there. Of course, the Duke didn't refuse, and the girls ran off to play their childish games. Charlotte noticed that he was good with the children, and they managed to find a common language. He's gotten to know them better, although he still had a lot to learn. Charlotte reassured him that everything will work out. He is making an effort and keeping an eye on them, so you have to try harder to make up for lost time. That was true. The Duke didn't even deny that about her. He was getting very curious about how her stay at the estate was going.